So, homeowner associations are becoming increasingly popular across the US. About 25% of Americans currently are part of an HOA, which is quite a contrast from 50 years ago when less than 5% of homes were governed by them. Back in the day, HOAs were pretty much only used for condos, but now you'll see them in townhomes, single family home neighborhoods, and apartment complex communities where each building is owned by a different owner, like we were talking about before. Now, given this increase in popularity, landlords are often faced with the decision about if it's a good idea to buy a rental property in an HOA or not, which is precisely why we are doing this episode today. Welcome to Your Landlord Resource Podcast. Many moons ago, when I started as a landlord, I was as green as it gets. I may have had my real estate license, but I lacked confidence and the hands-on experience needed when it came to dealing with tenants, leases, maintenance, and bookkeeping. After many failed attempts, fast forward to today, Kevin and I have doubled our doors and created an organized, professionally operated rental property business. Want to go from overwhelmed to confident? If you're an ambitious landlord or maybe one in the making, join us as we provide strategies and teach actionable steps to help you reach your goals and the lifestyle you desire, all while building a streamlined and profitable rental property business. This is Your Landlord Resource Podcast. Hey there, landlords. Thanks so much for tuning in and listening to the Your Landlord Resource Podcast. I'm your host, Stacy Casella, and I am here with my co-host and hubby, Kevin Kilroy.
Yes. Hello there. Happy to be here again this week.
Yeah, it has definitely been a busy few weeks for sure. In April, we took a 10-day trip to the East Coast and we visited with some family and some friends, as well as did some touring around Virginia, Washington, D.C., and New York.
Yeah, that was a fun trip. I mean, we've been back there a few times and it never gets old. I love it back there. But we were only home a few days before we road tripped from the San Francisco Bay Area down to San Diego for the oldest son's engagement party. It was fun. We had a blast, but to tell you the truth, I'm happy to be back home.
Yeah, well, let's not let that grass grow too much under our feet because we're going back to visit kid number 2 in Boise and check out the fourplex back there while we're in town.
Yeah, it's all good stuff, and we're very lucky and happy to be able to travel so much. We have no big, huge vacations planned for the summer, so it'll be nice to spend some time up in the mountains at the cabin. We really weren't able to do that much last summer.
No, we weren't, but that's the nice part of being able to work from anywhere. Except, I have to say, I really don't care to work when I'm away. I always say I'm going to, but when it comes down to it, I only do what I have to do, like put out little fires that pop up from time to time. We have a great team here in California to service our rentals, but in Idaho, we use a property manager, and not because we choose to, kind of because we're forced to. So speaking of Idaho, we want to talk today about what it means to buy a rental property when they are located in an HOA. When we bought the fourplex back in Boise a couple years ago, we were not too concerned about it at first. The HOA fees were relatively low. I think it's like $250 a month for the fourplex. I don't think that's that bad.
Yeah, when we looked at condos in San Diego, some of those were, about $1,100 a month? So when we saw the $250, I mean, it looked like a bargain to us.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. And the bottom line, the more you pay, the more you get. And it's not uncommon for condos to be really high because there's a lot of common space there that needs to be dealt with. But we'll get to all of that in a minute. We will be going over what an HOA is, what control they generally have, and why sometimes they are great and other times they are definitely not.
So HOAs, also known as Homeowners Associations, are usually present in condominium complexes, single-family home neighborhoods, townhomes, and in our case, when identical apartment buildings are all in one large complex, but are owned by different owners. So this covers quite a variety of rental home types. The primary goal of an HOA is to manage a residential community through a small governing body. And they are there to ensure that each homeowner maintains certain standards within the community for the benefit of everybody. When you purchase a property that is overseen by an HOA, you are automatically a member and therefore you are held to their standard of conduct. Now, HOAs have rules and regulations that are created in the forms of CC&Rs, or covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Sometimes those can also be called bylaws. Now, here's a side note. Those CC&Rs, or bylaws, have to be filed with the local county assessor's office, and that's actually a good thing because it means that the rules and regulations must abide by all HUD and fair housing laws, and they cannot contain restrictions that are not legally enforceable. And I'm sure most of you understand that when there's an HOA, all property owners are charged dues that go towards taking care of all the common space and community area. Those dues can be a lot or very little. It depends on the size of the property and what maintenance needs to be done. So we have friends who pay $500 a month for their condo HOA dues and a son who pays $95 a year for his single family home. So that's the basic background on what HOAs are and what they are for. Now in Idaho, we own a fourplex that is in a complex with around 20 to 25 other identical buildings, and they all have different owners. Now, the buildings pretty much all look alike, and we all share the same garbage area, playground, there's a dog park, and the parking lot. And the nice thing about HOAs is that they have rules about the exterior of the property that require everyone in the complex or the neighborhood to keep their property looking nice. So no tall grass grows, no dilapidated or peeling paint, and sometimes there's restrictions on where garbage cans have to be kept and if you park boats or RVs in the driveway.
So basically, they are the exterior maintenance police for the neighborhood. Is that what you're saying?
Yep, pretty much. I mean, for single family homes at least. But we've seen some pretty funny videos on how some of those HOA presidents really take their job super seriously and they like to hand out violation. I mean, for the stupidest thing.
Yeah, I think we sent one of those videos to kid number 2 after he got a violation saying that he had too many weeds growing in the cracks of his driveway. So you just imagine that there's this person walking around with their clipboard and their pencil and they're making notes as they walk by every single property.
Yeah, I mean, I get it though, some of it. There's some properties in our neighborhood, I wish we could send them a violation. When those properties look like crap, I mean, it can really affect the value of all the properties around it.
Yeah, I mean, you're right there. But depending on what you are paying for that HOA, there can be some services that are really nice too. So in some cases, it's common for condos and for our complex in Idaho, they do this too, but they'll handle all the landscaping. So they're going to mow and blow and they maintain the sprinklers, which is a huge plus for us. They handle snow removal from the sidewalks, and then we pay them extra for them to clear the walkways and stairs that's actually on our own property. If there's a pool or tennis courts, or in our case with the little playground or the dog park, they maintain that as well. So it's not like you're paying for these fees and getting nothing in return. The problem is, for the most part, unless you sit on that HOA board, you have no control over who does the work. Now, the expense to pay is not so much an issue. Everyone pays the same amount, so the board only has that money to work with and budget from. But again, just because they have, say, 10 grand for a project, should they spend it all, or can they find someone to do the job for less and be able to keep some of that money in reserves? Now, we have not experienced it ourselves, but have heard of boards using landscapers or contractors that charge a bundle, and then those board members get personal kickbacks for getting that tradesman the contract. So, like, let's say a contractor gives a bid to replace all of the windows in a complex. And then that contractor has a little deal on the side that if he gets that job, he will do some work for someone on the board to, like, remodel a bath or something like that.
Yeah, so you definitely need to make sure whomever is on the HOA board is representing your best interest. And it can be really competitive when the board is getting voted on. All the control freaks in your neighborhood or complex come out and feel they can do the job better.
Oh my God. Can you imagine what it is like on Nextdoor when those elections happen? I mean, I know what it's like in our city when election time rolls around. It's brutal.
Oh my God. I mean, yeah, I definitely have a love-hate relationship with that Nextdoor app.
Yeah. Well, it definitely provides comic relief, if anything.
I will say we were scared to death that Gracie was going to poop on somebody's lawn and they'll post a video of it for the whole neighborhood to see and shame us.
Oh, I know. I mean, we're panicked now when anybody walks the dog. All right, let's get back to HOAs. So, homeowner associations are becoming increasingly popular across the US. About 25% of Americans currently are part of an HOA, which is quite a contrast from 50 years ago when less than 5% of homes were governed by them. Back in the day, HOAs were pretty much only used for condos, but now you'll see them in townhomes, single family home neighborhoods, and apartment complex communities where each building is owned by a different owner, like we were talking about before. Now, given this increase in popularity, landlords are often faced with the decision about if it's a good idea to buy a rental property in an HOA or not, which is precisely why we are doing this episode today. Let's talk about some of the drawbacks of owning rentals in an HOA. I think first and foremost, it's the cost. Now, they may tell you it's something like $250 a month, but that all depends on how well that money is managed. Like we said, they are in charge of maintaining certain exterior items and having to pay for those. In our case, in Idaho, we pay a company to manage our HOA, and the board is made up of property owners to make sure that the company is doing their job. Right before we bought, apparently, the property was managed by a company who was greatly mismanaging the account and doing work for the owners that was not covered by the bylaws. This led to a financial issue, and when the new company took over, they had to work really hard to build those reserves back up while paying for all that regular maintenance. In our case, we were fine, but for other HOAs, this money mismanagement has led to very costly assessments to be able to cover maintenance that needed to be completed. For instance, and this was not a money mismanagement issue, but more of an enactment of a California law, SB 721. Basically, California passed a new law saying that any balconies or walkways of rentals or condos over 6 feet had to be inspected, and then if any issues were found, they would have to have them all remedied by January 2025. We did a podcast on this a few months ago. We'll link it in the show notes if you want to listen to it. But the thing is, for large condo complexes, getting that first inspection is costly itself and it takes time to arrange. Then, to get the issues fixed is a whole nother set of responsibilities for the HOA board. A friend of ours who sits on the board for his condo complex of around 100 units said the whole process was coming in around $1 million. And that is not a common reserve amount for these complexes to hold on to. And a pretty hefty assessment had to be completed where each condo owner had to come up with several $1,000s.
And most of these HOAs are pretty good about planning and knowing when they have to resurface parking lots or when the pools or tennis courts or a clubhouse will need to be redone. But because this new law creates a scenario for HOAs that can be really expensive, and for large complexes where this law affects all of the condos, rentals or not, is why the state gave everyone 5 years to complete it. Raising capital to pay for it can be a burden to some homeowners, or in our case, rental property owners, which there are several in that condo complex Stacy was just talking about. Some other downsides of an HOA is they can be very strict on the rules for the exterior of your rental property. It is not uncommon for them to regulate the color of paint you can use on your rental, even the front door. You're not likely to see a bright red or yellow door in an HOA. And they can even go so far as to stating the type of pets you can or cannot have, which obviously would not apply to ESAs, but they can tell you or your tenant that they, for example, can have chickens in your backyard. Now, let's talk about how HOAs can affect a rental property. A big one for us landlords is that they can regulate if you're allowed to make your home a rental or not. Bylaws can have restrictions on if you can rent your home by stating how many leases you can issue per year and force you to have a minimum lease period. They can require screening your tenants after you do by asking tenants to provide proof of income and credit reports and speak to their previous landlords to see how they maintain their previous rental. They might have to agree to a background check and be interviewed by the HOA board. I mean, this kind of makes me think of the old Seinfeld episode where George has to be interviewed with an HOA co-op board for a New York apartment, and in typical George fashion, really blows it.
Yes, I mean, that's classic Seinfeld, though. But yeah, I mean, they can require all those things.
And it's also not unheard of that they issue a rental property cap so there can only be so many homes that can be rentals at any given time. And I can confidently say that most all HOAs definitely will have rules for short-term rentals. When it comes to rentals, they can have rules in the CC&Rs or bylaws that state an owner has to live in the home for a certain period of time before turning it into a rental. And almost all HOAs will want a copy of your lease and require the tenant to sign an acknowledgement of the bylaws. Now, can the HOA say no rentals at all? I guess technically yes, but it's our understanding that that is not something that would be decided by the board. That's something that would be voted on by all members of the association. Also, from our understanding, most of those rental restrictions apply towards short-term rentals and not so much the long-term one. And the last thing to mention is that we own rentals ultimately to make money. It is not uncommon for the HOA fees to increase over time as expenses rise, so that first amount you are told is not always a dependable number. That's why we highly recommend you research the HOA and how they manage their money. If there hasn't been an increase in dues for quite a while, use caution. One is either coming or the HOA is not managing funds well.
Yeah. So, as we mentioned before, not all homeowners associations are operated the same way. Some may be super easy and just have rules about lawn growth and weeds. Some are going to dictate the color of mulch that you can use in your landscaping. There may be architectural restrictions as well. So, if you're buying a rental with the hopes of renovating it, you need to make sure you are aware of what styles you can choose and materials are allowed. Often, they want the neighborhood very cookie cutter or to look the same. This can help with resale values down the line, and if the numbers work and you don't want to spend a lot of time dealing with landscape design, maybe this is a situation that will work well for you. So, let's talk about enforcement now. Every HOA has documents called CC&Rs or bylaws, like Kevin said, that define all of the rules and the fees associated for fines should you not comply with those rules. And usually they're going to give you a warning and then they'll hand out a fine if you don't fix the issue. However, those fees can continue to rise with the second and third offenses. Why is this an issue? Because if your home is a rental and the tenant placed in there is not responsible, you, as the owner, are the one who gets fined, not them. Living in an HOA creates a whole new set of rules that the tenant needs to abide by. And you better understand what all those rules are and include them in your lease so the tenant can sign off that they understand and will abide. You also need to make sure that you include what your fees and penalties will be should they break the rules and you get fined. You certainly don't have to charge the tenant for these fines and you can just cover them yourself, but I don't really advise that. You handing those fines down to the tenant will incentivize them to stay in compliance.
And keep in mind, you should make sure that all HOA correspondence goes to your mailing address and not the rental property address. Irresponsible tenants may ignore the notices or not tell you, and the next thing you know, you have a bundle of fees or fines to pay. So one huge mistake we made when we bought the fourplex in Idaho was not reading the HOA bylaws before we bought the complex. And we cannot stress this enough. If you are buying a rental property operated by an HOA, it is imperative that you read all of the documentation and do your due diligence before you finish the inspection period of your purchase offer. If you can, ask to see a copy of all HOA documents before you even put in your offer. This would include the bylaws, common restrictions, monthly costs, and if there are any upcoming plans for special assessments. Do as much research as possible and familiarize yourself with how they operate, like asking how many times an HOA has charged owners for special assessments. If it seems like too many, the HOA may not be managing their reserves well, nor be doing preventative maintenance or inspections to avoid having to pay a lot of emergency repairs that the current reserves cannot cover. And reviewing the rules and guidelines ahead of time can also show you whether or not the HOA rules are easy to follow. Doing all of this will help you avoid all those financial and other surprises, like the need to resurface the whole parking lot or paint the entire complex. For us, we did not know that everyone in the complex had to use the same property management company. We had hoped to manage the property ourselves from California and use our son, who lives in the area, to handle the emergencies if they arose. Now, had we known we had no choice in the matter about the company the HOA uses, there's a good chance we would have moved on to a different property. I'll say that where we love our rep who handles the day-to-day tasks for our property, we're not as thrilled with the company as a whole. When we first met the owners to go over their duties and get some information, there was a bit of a battle of the wills between he and Stacy. I mean, this is our property, and we were basically told we had very little control over the way they managed our unit. Now, we do understand that they have their method, and we respect that. But when we initially asked about looking over the lease, we were told we would have no say or control over the contents of it. And that didn't sit too well with us, as it is ultimately our name and our responsibility for the way the property is managed. When we asked about communicating with the tenants, we were told all communication had to go through them and be approved before they would send it out. I mean, I thought Stacy was going to come unglued about that one.
Yeah, okay, listen. If I want to send my tenant a birthday card or a gift card over the holidays, I am not going to send it through them. And to be honest, we didn't either. I take that back. I think when we took over ownership, we wanted to send an email to the tenants introducing ourselves, and they had a few issues with some of the terminology that we used. And I can't remember exactly what it was, and I do understand their position there. It can be very confusing to the tenants if they are communicating with both the owner and the management team. The tenants may feel like they can go over the manager's head to get answers or changes, and that is not okay. But we like to send gifts and acknowledgments to our tenants, and we had to adjust how we were able to do that is all. I do know that their system allows them to create form letters and fills in our names as well as the tenant names automatically. And it may seem totally stupid, but none of the names were capitalized and the spacing was all wonky. And again, it may seem silly, but to us, those are the kind of things that are totally unprofessional. It looks really sloppy, and if you can't take time to capitalize names in your database, what else are you being sloppy and lazy about? And another issue we were able to finally resolve was that there was no portal where we could see the correspondence between the management team and the tenant. So we would not be able to know when they went in for a repair unless there was a cost that exceeded our reserve account with them. We had to ask them to contact us with every repair so we could keep track of the maintenance being done. And bottom line, when we first started out, we felt we had very little control over our new rental property. And that's a tough one to swallow after we've been managing our own units for the last 20 years. We run our business clean and neat and professionally while still caring for who lives in our units. And we did not get a sense that this management company operated in the same way. And it did make my stomach turn. But things have improved, and I do credit our rep for that. But moving on, make sure you understand all the provisions laid out in those bylaws so you don't find yourself going, oh no, what have we done?
So if the HOA doesn't manage their money well, you might find their assessments cutting into your profits, and those assessments are really hard to estimate. Okay, so is investing in rental property that is located in an HOA worth it? We would say, as with almost everything in investing, if the numbers work. I mean, remove all the restrictions and see your best estimate on what your return is. You'll need to include that HOA fee in addition to your base rent. But some people are willing to pay more depending on the amenities of the complex or what the neighborhood may offer. Some have pools, gyms, tennis courts, or should I say now, pickleball courts. Some are gated and have security that a tenant may be willing to pay extra for. Some have clubhouses that you can rent pretty inexpensively to hold parties or gatherings too. And some have nothing or very little to offer, but they're in a desirable neighborhood or near really good schools with safe sidewalks and homes that are kept up and nice looking.
So, why would you want to invest in a rental that's located within an HOA? Like Kevin was just talking about, they often offer a slew of amenities that you can't get in a regular neighborhood. Those amenities can help you attract higher end tenants who can afford to pay a little more for those perks. They also can increase the value of your rental as areas with pools, sports courts, gyms, etc. are becoming more desirable to live in. If you're a hands-off kind of landlord, owning in an HOA can mean less maintenance with regards to landscaping if that's something the community handles for all the homeowners. Like we mentioned before, in the winter months, we don't have to worry about snow removal at our Idaho property. And you guys, that's worth its weight in gold, honestly. It's nice having all the properties maintained. They all look nice and kept up, so that can offer the landlord peace of mind by not having to require and then monitor a tenant to make sure they handle all the exterior maintenance by way of landscaping. Would we buy another rental within an HOA? I hate to be like this, but it depends. And if the numbers work and the CC&Rs are not very restrictive, then probably we would. But we completely blew it when we bought Idaho. Could we have backed out? Yeah, but Idaho was a 1031 exchange and time was not on our side. So, quick side note, for a 1031 exchange, you have to identify and select 3 properties that you're interested in buying, and you have 45 days to complete the exchange for one of those properties you've identified. This property in Idaho was the last of 3 properties we had identified and locked in as our target purchases, and we would have lost a ton of money. Not only the earnest money deposit on that real estate deal that we put down, but in capital gains, we would have had to pay for not completing the exchange of property on time. It was better for us to just follow through with the sale and hope we gain enough equity in the deal to be able to do another exchange in a few years. I think the thing that would make us hesitate to invest in an HOA would be the lack of control that we would have. And this would be if we bought a condo, say in Hawaii or Florida or someplace people like to travel to, if we had the hopes of Airbnb-ing it. In our current portfolio, we're moving away from single-family home rentals and scaling up to multifamily, which likely won't be an issue being governed by an HOA. Well, unless we buy another complex like we just did in Idaho. If we were going to focus on the single-family space and found an HOA where a lot of the landscaping and snow removal maintenance would be handled for us and the numbers worked, absolutely we would invest.
I mean, yeah, you have to consider what you would be paying for those services to do their work anyway, plus your time to manage and pay the bills. Sometimes paying the HOA to handle it, knowing they have higher standards, can be worth it. And we often say, time is money. How much money are you willing to put out to give you more time? Now, on the flip side, associations can always change their bylaws if they get the votes. So you do lack control over the rules and regulations. All it takes is for one huge nuisance that bugs all the other residents and something your tenants would like a certain pet or storing their boat or RV, and your property value and the ability to rent it can go way down.
Yeah, there are definitely some conveniences to owning property in full service HOAs, but those are also the ones that are going to have more restrictions too. All right, you guys, that is our show today. We cannot express enough how much we appreciate that you've taken the time out of your day to listen to what we have to say. And we hope you've learned a little something about owning rentals or any property that's located in an HOA. Let me close out the show with a few more things. First, we now have a link where you can text us questions, or you can tell us how much you love us. That would be nice too. You can find that link at the top of our show notes that are attached to each podcast episode on all the podcast platforms. Where it doesn't come direct to our phones, we do check it a couple times a day, so don't get discouraged if we don't respond right away. And we would love if you would test it out and text us a question for our upcoming Q&A episode that we're going to be doing in a couple months. If you prefer to email us questions, you can do that too. We'll link our emails in the show notes for you. We have an online course we're working on that will walk you through the steps of placing your ideal tenant. It's called From Marketing to Move-In, and we are going to include how best to market your unit, including photos, which Kevin's going to throw a little course in there on how to take the best photos of a rental property, the writing of your ad, showing your unit, accepting applications, and how to vet your applicant. We're also going to teach you about your lease and what it should contain and what to do before and when your tenant moves into your unit. So if you have ever struggled with finding the right tenant to pay on time or one who takes care of your unit, this course is for you. You can sign up to get on our wait list and potentially be a part of our first beta group by using the link in the show notes. And of course, we have links on there for our free weekly newsletter, all the forms and documents that we have created for you to download, our private Facebook group, and all the links to our social media sites so you can follow along. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. We are very grateful that you find our content useful. And until next time, you've got this, landlords.